Nothing gets anime nerds frothing at the mouth quite like a good power system. Daydreaming about all the horrific ways we'd play God if only we could clap our hands and do an alchemy. Puzzling out strategies for a dude with localized time reversal to take on a guy who turns everything he touches into Skittles. Crunching the numbers to determine precisely who can and cannot beat Goku, though. It's basically fantasy football for people who don't even want to imagine touching grass. Our collective obsession with this stuff has kept Shonen battle anime at the top of this fandom for longer than I've been watching the stuff, or even alive for that matter. And today, we're gonna take a look back at that whole history to see how popular power systems have evolved over the years and hopefully figure out what exactly makes the truly great ones great. Before we can get into that though, this video, like many on YouTube, is sponsored by a free video game. But get this game's actually free. Like, you get to play all the way to the ending just by signing up for DL site while the offer lasts. No credit card required, no strings attached. Unless you count G-strings, there are some of those, and they can be detached with the aid of a credit card if you feel so inclined. But to be clear, Secret with Sophia Light is a full-featured visual novel from Megami-Soft that lets you fully experience a relaxing, healing, all-ages friendly relationship with the titular Sophia, an adorable, beautifully animated live 2D maid who also happens to be your childhood friend. Ain't that convenient? As your choices push your relationship in personal or professional, but not too professional directions, you'll cozily sip cocoa together on cold winter's eves, relax after a hard day's work with lap pillow head pats, smooch if you're both feeling it, and even hold hands. Golly, if the all-ages version's that lewd, imagine what the R18 one's like. I mean, you'll have to imagine, I definitely can't describe it on YouTube, but whatever version you get, remember to, quote, play it on a large monitor for maximum Sophia. Of course, that's just one of the countless Japanese doujin works you can find on DL site, from manga to video games to ASMR tracks and even anime, over 10,000 of which are available in English. They have plenty of stuff that appeals to both men and women, not to mention plenty of fantastic all-ages products, and best of all, whatever you buy, you get to enjoy it knowing you directly supported the artist who made it. So sign up at the link in the doobly-doo to get Secret with Sophia Light and see what else they have in store today. As with most important stuff in the world of shonen battlers, the easiest place to start talking about power systems as we know them today is Dragon Ball and its hugely influential ki system. Now, Akira Toriyama didn't invent the concept of ki or chi, nor was he the first guy to use it in the manga. The idea that there's this essential energy permeating the cosmos that animates all living things is a fundamental underpinning of ancient Chinese philosophy that has influenced many East Asian cultures. It's an essential component of feng shui, a variety of pseudoscientific healing practices, and most importantly for today's discussion, many forms of martial arts, from Tai Chi and Kung Fu to Aikido and Kendo. Generally speaking, martial artists use the idea of ki at all. It's only as a mental model to aid in mastering their own bodies. But if you've seen Super Eye Patch Wolf's bizarre world of fake martial arts, then you know there are also a lot of charlatans out there who claim to be able to directly weaponize this life energy. And you know, if you're writing fiction about something that already has such a fantastical idea attached to it, then it's only natural to work that into the story. So of course, the concept made its way into a fair number of martial arts films and manga before Dragon Ball. Most notably, 1983's Fist of the North Star, where ki could, for example, be channeled into a dude's vital points with a rapid series of light strikes, causing his head to explode after you've had exactly just enough time to say, "Omae wa mou shindeiru." Nani? But ki could also be fired off in blasts at distant enemies, a favorite technique of the villain Rao, though in the Fist of the North Star universe, it's generally considered to be more energy efficient and all-around tactically sound to just punch a guy 9 times out of 10. So ki blasts are mostly used for opportunistic ranged attacks and scoring psychological damage on less knowledgeable foes who don't really understand how ki works. Nonetheless, Fist of the North Star's depiction of ki still had a huge influence on Akira Toriyama when he started writing Dragon Ball a year later, although he would take the idea even further beyond. Early on, ki's mostly used to explain the heightened speed, strength, and reflexes of the manga's most accomplished martial artists, but Goku also learns to channel his into the Kamehameha wave like 14 chapters in, and while its slow charge-up time means that it's not practical in a lot of situations, it immediately becomes his go-to finishing move. As the series went on, more dangerous opponents would periodically show up to challenge Goku with their own deadly ki-based finishers and moves, like Mercenary Tao, that guy who's totally not Master Roshi, and most notably Tien Shinhan, who could also push ki through his feet to levitate. One of many creative applications of the idea that would start to crop up, like ki flashbangs, or sacrificing all of your ki at once to ensnare the Demon King's soul in a rice cooker. Over time, Goku also started thinking laterally with the Kamehameha, using it to propel himself and avoid a ring out in the World Martial Arts Tournament, and a little later to rocket fist first through the Demon King's chest. Then the Demon King's son rapidly came of age and came for his revenge at the next World Martial Arts Tournament, showing off a variety of cool techniques in the process, but more importantly, in preparation for that same tournament, Yamcha develops a technique to throw a small ball of concentrated ki at his enemies. And once Yamcha's allowed to do something, there goes the neighborhood. Welcome to Power Creep City. One big time skip later, fucking everyone can fly. Folks are throwing tiny bits of ki at each other like it's going out of style, and the forms evolved well beyond just the basic balls and beams. I mean, there's still definitely a lot of those, like 20 different flavors of Kamehameha, but you can also twist ki beams around each other to make a penetrating ki drill, spin those balls into a flat disc with a cutting edge, throw out tiny ki blasts like a Gatling gun, condense a whole bunch of ki into a teeny tiny ball that blows up a whole planet after the longest 5 minutes ever, or you can ask all the good beings around you to channel their positive ki, Genki, into a spirit bomb, or Genki Dama, that specifically only destroys creatures who've tainted their own ki with, like, bad vibes. And honestly, this is all amazing stuff. As Dragon Ball went on, ki became this incredibly versatile concept that allowed Toriyama to craft a stupidly wide range of seriously beautiful battle scenes that are still iconic to this day. And for the kids at home, it became a lot easier and safer to try this stuff at home, because instead of like kicking and punching each other while mixing in the occasional Kamehameha or Tri-Beam or whatever, now they were throwing up Destructo discs, loudly charging their ki to go Super Saiyan, and going at a safe distance where they were only in danger of public humiliation. That fun, accessible play factor is one of ki's biggest strengths as a system. I mean, the internet's still pumping out Saiyan OCs 3 decades later for a good reason, but it also has some big downsides which only become more pronounced the longer the series gets. Put simply, ki's too simple for its own good. It just doesn't leave much room for varied, unique power sets. Those kinda peaked with the Ginyu Force. So, past a certain point, DBZ ends up devolving into a series of really basic slugfests where the guy with the girthiest beam usually wins, which is something there's still pretty sizable audience for, clearly, but that audience doesn't really need more than one thing like that, so we gotta take a quick detour. As the genre grew into a genre, future and contemporary series would need to find ways to differentiate themselves from Dragon Ball. Ranma did it by mixing up its martial arts action with proto-harem shenanigans. Saint Seiya added the wrinkle of power-channeling clothes to its We Have Ki at Home Cosmos system. And around the same time Goku's good-for-nothing brother was rolling into town to be a bad influence on his nephew, another series was getting ready to completely break the mold. In its first 2 parts, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure was basically British Fist of the North Star with vampires, and even then it did do some really interesting and influential things with its ki-adjacent magic sun breath martial arts system, Hamon, giving us creative applications like sticking to walls Spider-Man style by pouring the energy into your feet, or like blowing bubbles that are really, really hard. Also, unparalleled fashion. But after time skip into the modern day, while it did keep a couple vampires around for posterity, Part 3 threw that system out and replaced it with something far more unique and versatile. Stands. Stands are basically psychic powers, which had been used in other manga and anime like Akira, Kimagure Orange Road, and Spriggan that very same year. But JoJo's creator Hirohiko Araki had the innovative idea of melding that concept with the shonen martial arts formula that was evolving at the time, and more importantly, he made the bold artistic move of embodying those psychic powers in weird little robot ghost dudes named after tarot cards, and then once he ran out of those, albums from his shelf. Once he realized he could get away with that, he started basing the powers of those robot ghosts on the names of random bands, songs, and albums too. Plus, random encyclopedia pages, pretty much anything he could get his hands on. And while he tried to add some hard rules to keep all of that semi-consistent, stands are more powerful the shorter the range of their abilities, unless they have an automatic function outside the user's control. A lot of villains and even some heroes just completely ignore that, and basically the system's anything goes. Explaining everything stands can do would basically involve recapping the entire last 30 years of this manga. They can be a mini sun that follows you and gives you heat stroke, make a real big scary car, steal a guy's soul by beating him at video games, erase physical space from existence, be a bomb inside your eye that sends you back in time when you spill secrets, hypnotize dudes into turning into snails with deadly rainbows, violate all the copyrights in Florida simultaneously, or instantly make this video twice as long the second I even attempt to describe King Crimson. JoJo dramatically expanded the possibility space for battle manga powers, from martial arts with laser beams to essentially anything the author could imagine and draw. In Part 4, it also introduced the idea that stands could be a reflection of their users' personalities, but it's kind of inconsistent with that. A lot of the time, it kind of seems like Araki just came up with a cool idea for a power and stapled it onto a cool idea for a guy that he also had, with very little care for the symbolism. But any way you slice it, stands stand behind only Ki and arguably one other thing we're about to get to, as one of the most influential power systems in Shonen. In 1992, as JoJo Part 3 was steamrolling toward its epic finale, another manga appeared on the scene that didn't really rock the power system boat at all, actually, but pushed the genre forward in pretty much every other way. Yoshihiro Togashi's Yu Hakusho gave us a rich, emotional story with a compellingly flawed teen hero that set a new bar for shonen protags and their whole supporting casts.
Kuwabara could really use your help on this one. But I hate Kuwabara.
And it did it all while effectively redefining the whole shonen battler template with some of the best plotted story arcs in manga history, including what is to this day still the greatest tournament arc ever. I will die on that hill. If this was a video about any other aspect of this genre besides power systems, Yu Hakusho would have its whole own chapter. But on that front, its only real innovation was to take the basic idea of the Genki Dama, that there can be good and bad ki, and codify that into a formal system where spirits and demons have their own distinct flavors, Reiki and Yoki. Until the last couple chapters, that's mostly a lore distinction though, and the way that they're used isn't really all that different from Dragon Ball and a little bit of JoJo. Even if specific applications, like making a sword out of ki that can cut through dimensions or doing finger guns like pew pew, are abnormally rad. I don't know if it would really be worth mentioning at all here, except that somehow that incredible, influential, groundbreaking manga was just Togashi's warm-up lap. After burning out on weekly chapters of Yu Hakusho due to health issues and other problems in 1994, he got to work developing a new adventure manga concept that spoke to his personal obsession with collecting stuff. In 1998, Hunter x Hunter was released to the world, and a year after that, it introduced what is still the gold standard by which all other shonen power systems should be judged: Nen. It took that long because Nen is so much more powerful than any any other martial force in this manga's universe, that extreme steps need to be taken to stop it from falling into the wrong hands and destabilizing the whole geopolitical situation. Unless you're extremely lucky, you have to pass an absurdly difficult and dangerous exam, which takes the whole first 38 chapters of the manga, just to get the okay to learn it from one of the few teachers scattered around the world. And the Hunter Association doesn't even tell you it exists at that point, because they figure if you're really worthy of the license, you'll find it by chance, which is fantastic world building on so many levels. Like, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the association's true political purposes. And when you find somebody who's learned Nen outside the association, that's a really big deal. But it's also extremely effective storytelling, because even before we learn what Nen is, we see a ton of characters using it, most significantly Netero and Hisoka. So unconsciously, we know there's gotta be some explanation for the clear and overwhelming power gap between those characters and our heroes, not to mention some reason that both of those guys see a lot of potential in Gon, which creates an immense sense of anticipation for the reveal. And is it worth all that buildup? Holy shit, yes! Nen is a true evolution of Dragon Ball's ideas. Not you. I was not calling for you. I will never be calling for you. I mean, the essential life energy that it taps into is called aura, not ki, and that's actually not a distinction without difference, because Nen combines the concept of ki arts with psychic powers. Still, like Dragon Ball, the core idea here is a martial art based around the manipulation of that vital energy. Except that Togashi actually bothered to figure out not just a name for that martial art, but the fundamental energy manipulation techniques that make advanced applications like ki blasts possible. Those fundamentals being 10. Concentrating your aura so it flows around your body instead of floating uselessly away. Zetsu, shutting off your aura nodes to erase your presence completely. Ren, amplifying your aura output to enhance your offensive and defensive capabilities, and amplify your presence, projecting an air of bloodlust that can intimidate other Nen users and even paralyze or possibly kill normal people without Nen defenses. And finally, there's Hatsu, manipulating your aura to produce specific and unique supernatural effects, the nature of which are determined by your own unique nature. Only when you've mastered all 4 of these principles have you truly achieved Nen. There is a lot more to all that than I'm letting on here, and also like a bunch of advanced techniques based on those first 3 principles that I could get into, but I'm trying not to turn this whole thing into a giant steaming exposition dump, and golly, there sure is a lot of exposition to dump about this here power system. I mean, get a load of all these charts and graphs. I thought this was a battle manga, not the ding-dang infographic channel. If you haven't read or watched Hunter x Hunter, it can seem like a lot, and honestly, it kinda is, even with Togashi's slow drip approach to world building. But it's also a lot less complicated than all these numbers may make it seem, because at its core, Nen isn't really about math, it's about character. See, everyone in Hunter x Hunter's universe is born with an innate affinity for one of the 6 types of Nen that's directly tied to their base personality. You have thoughtful, persuasive manipulators able to control the physical world by infusing objects or animals with aura, impulsive, hot-headed emitters who can project their aura at a distance, stubborn, straightforward enhancers who can strengthen their own bodies and weapons with aura, playful, unreliable transmuters who can change the physical properties of their aura to make it sharp or electrified or...
Bungee gum contains the properties of both rubber and gum, you see.
Thanks! Great example! You're not supposed to be this close to a school. Now, all of the Nen powers we've talked about so far are effectively invisible to normal people, but the physical objects made out of the aura of high-strung, analytical conjurers are the exception to that rule. And on that note, the rare charismatic specialist type is an exception to all the rules, either possessing an innate affinity for every type of Nen or a unique power that defies categorization, like predicting the future. With practice, any Nen user can learn any non-specialist move. However, the further that move's type is from your type on this handy-dandy graph, the less powerful it'll be compared to someone with the right affinity, which of course opens the door to all sorts of min-maxy theory crafting morphing just with the powers we see in the anime. But the real genius of Nen lies in how every user gets to craft their own signature moves within the confines of those categories. Meaning, every ability can be a unique manifestation of its user's quirks, fixations, history, and self-image. As a basic example, Kiryu is a prickly dude who keeps people at a distance, so symbolically it makes a lot of sense that he turns his aura into a taser. But also, that speaks to the history of abuse and torture he's suffered at the hands of his family, which taught him what electricity coursing through his body feels like. As a more complicated example, Netero has weaponized the Buddha of compassion, which reflects how he's twisted his peaceful faith to serve his ambitions as a warrior, and also suggests that he has something of a god complex, which, especially when you put him in contrast to Meruem, that whole arc really deserves its own video. The psychological aspects of Nen are a fantastic character building and storytelling tool that allows Togashi and any mangaka inspired by him to explore who a character is through what they can do. But as a side effect, they also make it effectively impossible to read or watch Hunter x Hunter without also spending hours thinking about what your Nen would be, no matter how old you are. For instance, my Nen, Stack the Deck, would let me capture any object, phenomena, or event that I can frame with my fingers and describe in a succinct paragraph onto one of 40 blank trading cards. When I activate the ability, 4 random cards float out of my deck, and every time an enemy attacks me, I get to draw one more. I can then use the conjured cards themselves as weapons or shields, but more importantly, by grabbing hold of one and revealing it, I can reproduce whatever... Sorry, it's easy to get carried away and sort of start writing fanfics when you're thinking about Nen. I'm sure you can check the comments below to see plenty of proof of that. Or you could just watch Naruto. Masashi Kishimoto is a huge self-proclaimed fan of Togashi's work, but he doesn't need to be, because his own work does plenty of proclaiming for him. Tsunade's basically Big Titty Biscuit, the Akatsuki's just the Phantom Troop in fancy bathrobes, the Chunin exams are basically the Hunter exam in Groucho Marx glasses, and when Kishimoto's editor told him Naruto needed a rival, he basically just threw Togashi's 3 most popular characters in a blender. And likewise, in figuring out the mechanics of Naruto's chakra, he borrowed a lot of concepts from Aura, right down to the litmus test that defines the nature of one's powers via how they change the state of the testing medium. Chakra paper is a less interesting medium than Hunter x Hunter's Leaf in Water IMO, but on the flip side, it's way less likely to prompt a angry letter to the editor when kids play pretend all over the kitchen table. In a similar vein, the hand signs used to activate jutsu at least give Naruto's power system a distinctive aesthetic, while also giving kids a very accessible way to play ninja without the obvious risks. But yeah, in terms of actual applications, taijutsu's just enhancement, puppeteers, shadow stitchers, and animal handlers are all various flavors of manipulator. Shadow clones and summoning are conjuring moves, only bigger sometimes. Most long-range jutsu are emission analogs. The fact that all chakra has an innate elemental affinity does add some wrinkles to transmutation, or change in chakra nature, like the ability to combine elements to make new ones, but in practice, that really just limits the possibilities more than anything else. I mean, no chakra nature has the properties of both rubber and gum. Now, in theory, the biggest difference from Nen is that Jutsu doesn't place any soft or hard limits on what kind of techniques anyone except Rock Lee can learn, but in practice, everyone kind of sticks to a small set of signature moves that are mostly unique to them, including the snake guy, whose whole thing is snakes, even though his other whole thing is supposed to be learning every jutsu that there ever was. Basically, it's Hatsu without the character development. Though, that doesn't stop a lot of those powers from being straight up awesome. Shikamaru and Gaara are both amazing concepts for manipulators. Haku's ice mirrors will forever be stuck in my brain as one of the coolest conjuring type powers ever. Deidara's exploding clay bird things just fucking rule. Rule of cool takes Naruto a long way. And Kishimoto's skills as an illustrator and fun tactical fight choreography take it even farther. Also, to be fair, he didn't take all his ideas from Hunter x Hunter. No one uses Nen to walk on walls. That's a JoJo thing. Of course, you don't need to reinvent the wheel to make a great battle manga. Just look at Yu Hakusho. And all things considered, it was probably good for the genre as a whole that the third best-selling battle manga of all time had so much Hunter x Hunter DNA to pass on to its many progeny. But at the same time, I do think Kishimoto's lack of confidence in his own ideas is a big factor in Naruto falling off as hard as it eventually does. Instead of Naruto running with the few cool new concepts he did come up with, like genjutsu illusions, and leaning into the deceptive ninja mind games that made the early series action distinct and fun, he just kept falling back on what worked for his predecessors. Bigger battles with bigger, cooler powers, and as a result, he ultimately fell into the same trap as Toriyama. But of course, that is only a third of the big three, and the biggest of the three, the best-selling manga of any type ever written, in fact, put plenty of its own fun ideas on the table in the form of a delectable fruit spread. In 1997, Eiichiro Oda's One Piece introduced the world to Monkey D. Luffy, a shonen hero with a fighting style unlike any shonen fans had seen before, unless they watched Popeye. But unlike that, Sailor Man, there's more to how Luffy can do that than simply because cartoon.
He's made of rubber!
How did that happen?
Yo ho ho, he took a bite of gum gum!
The fruits of the Sea Devil can be found in all corners of One Piece's world, each one granting a unique cartoon superpower to the first person who takes a bite at the cost of their ability to swim. These powers are separated into categories based on how they work. For example, Logia fruits turn their user's entire body into a primal element like fire or lightning, while Zoan fruits grant their user the form and abilities of a real or mythical animal, which, in theory, places more conceptual limitations on what a fruit user can do than, say, a stand user. But the third category, Paramecia, is basically just everything else. So, yeah, from slowing time to making pocket dimensions to turning your boogers into bombs, the only real limit is whatever Eiichiro Oda thinks is funny. Although Oda does carefully consider what each power set can and can't do to give each character their own interesting problems to solve. The same fundamental dynamic that makes JoJo fights so consistently engaging and varied. That said, as the many parts of JoJo prove, stories that focus too heavily on an individualized power system can end up feeling a little disjointed, which would go against One Piece's ultimate goal of being the manga Lord of the Rings, so the series also takes a page out of Togashi's book by introducing a secondary universal power system partway through, whose secrets are jealously guarded by the world's elite. And by partway through, I mean, nobody even says the word hockey until like chapter 500.
Kept you waiting, huh?
The three types of hockey each borrow ideas from some of the foundational Nen techniques, although Oda makes some key changes to each of them to reinforce the idea that hockey is supposed to be literal willpower, not just a generic psychic aura. Armament hockey is basically Ken, a Nen technique that enshrouds the user in a defensive aura mixed with Shu, which infuses objects with aura to strengthen them, and more importantly in the context of One Piece, allow regular-ass people to hit Devil Fruit users who would otherwise be intangible or invincible. Observation hockey is clearly inspired by En, which extends the user's aura outward to detect any movement within its radius, though it also allows you to read the willpower of other living creatures within that radius to predict their movements. Lastly, the rare Conqueror's hockey works a lot like Ren, projecting your willpower outward to dominate the minds of others, though with practice it can also be used to block observation hockey or even infused into attacks to give them extra non-defensive oomph. Hockey is not a super expansive or flexible system, but then One Piece doesn't really need it to be. It just needs to complement the Devil Fruit powers, which it does spectacularly both on an action level and, more importantly, a thematic one. Devil fruits reinforce the idea that One Piece's world is this wild, chaotic, and unpredictable place full of untold wonders, whereas haki is a manifestation of the idea that those with big enough dreams, strong enough convictions, or a keen enough sense of their surroundings can handle anything that world might throw at them. One Piece is incredibly smart with how it uses its power systems to reflect its core ideas. But even smarter than that, if you'll permit me a quick tangent, is how it uses and subverts the idea of explicit power scaling. You probably know power scaling as the fan practice of comparing and contrasting fictional feats of strength to win online arguments about whose imaginary dad can beat up who. But it's also something that authors can make use of, and it even serves a purpose within a narrative. When a dude with a big ass number shows up and kicks a bunch of other dudes' asses, but then another dude comes in and that first dude asks the dude with his scouter what's his power level, and then that dude's all like,
It's over 9,000.
it's always hype. It is all but impossible not to feel some level of excitement whenever a battle manga does that, so long as they don't overuse the trick.
魔力290、武力470、気力100の等級860。
But of course, whenever you show a numerical measure of power like that, you're encouraging your fans to think in those same terms. And while fan power scaling can be harmless fun, it's also birthed some of the most toxic and pointless flame wars in the history of the internet, and it's easy to get so caught up in who's stronger than who that you completely lose sight of the actual story conflicts driving the fights. Sometimes that even happens to the writers.
ふむふむふーむ。ギルボーの等級1970から2330に上昇。ハウザーの等級1910から2350に上昇。
So to avoid such distractions, a lot of mangaka just toss out power levels altogether, sacrificing that easy hype-building tool to make their battles more dynamic and keep the focus on the story. But One Piece found a way to have its whole cake island and eat it too, by replacing power levels with bounties. Bounties are assigned to pirates by a bunch of bureaucrats who've never even met them, based on how dangerous they think they are to the world government specifically. So like, a really strong dude who can explode an island by himself can have a high bounty, but so can a literal child who just happened to learn a regime delegitimizing secret. Also, the numbers are often based on faulty or straight up wrong information, like Chopper only has 1,000 berry bounty because the government thinks he's Luffy's pet. And thanks to the many distorted tales of his heroics, God Usopp's bounty is 500 million, when it should obviously be way higher. I mean, dude absolutely demolishes Ultra Instinct Goku. It's not even close. But of course, that's the whole point. A high bounty is no guarantee that someone will win or even contend in a straight up fight. But what it does guarantee is they're about to do something interesting in the story. Meaning Oda gets to tap into that DBZ hype factor without limiting the scenarios he can write. Last but not least of the big three is Bleach, whose power system, Ryoku, actually has a directly objective and consistent measure of power levels in Reiatsu, or spirit pressure, but nonetheless gives power scalers aneurysms because of how insane it gets. Come to think of it, can also give the characters in the show aneurysms if they get too close to someone with a lot of spirit pressure, because it's literally a kind of atmospheric pressure, not just, you know, a thing that they call that because it sounds cool. See, at the most basic level, Ryoku is simply the ability to sense and manipulate atmospheric spiritual energy in the form of spirit particles called reishi. But each kind of spiritual being in the series, Shinigami, Hollows, Quincy's, and Fullbringers, has their own type of Ryoku, each of which interacts with those particles in fundamentally different ways. Also, the stealth sequel, Burn the Witch, added wizards, dragons, and dragonclad to the mix, but we ain't got time for all that. To put a very long story short, Shinigami and spirits like them use reishi generated by their own spiritual cores to fight, whereas Hollows eat other spirits to absorb their reishi. This then converts that reishi into hollow reishi, which has the property of eating away at other reishi around it, and that makes it toxic to human quincies, whose powers are fueled by taking reishi in from the environment around them. Then, lastly, we have Fullbringers, another type of human whose mothers were attacked by hollows while they were in the womb, and therefore when their souls were forming, which left trace hollow powers in their souls that let them manipulate the souls of physical objects around them, which makes Fullbrings the only type of power in Bleach that can actually affect the physical world directly, whereas all the other ones only affect the spirit world. Take notes, this will be on the quiz later. No, but actually though, if you're the right kind of nerd, you may get a lot out of reading Bleach with a notepad handy. Tite Kubo worked out this power system down to like the particle physics level. We're talking Brando Sando levels of magical overthinking here. But unlike Mr. Sando, or Mr. Togashi for that matter, Kubo doesn't lean on a narrator to explain any of it. Actually, he barely tells the audience how it works at all. Instead, he simply shows the powers working. And if there happens to be a character around who cares about that sort of thing, they might try to reason out how the powers are working to the best of their understanding, but most of them are wrong to at least some extent, or distracted by something, like trying not to die in the middle of a big anime fight. And the few super genius scientist characters in the series who do actually understand how everything works are all either deeply arrogant, intentionally cryptic assholes, Mengele-level psychopaths, or both. So, of course, they're not going to explain shit to the reader. Thus, it's up to us to puzzle out from reading each individual fight how all these forms of Rei-Ryoku work, what they say about the characters who use them, and why they work the way they do. Not that you have to dig into this stuff to appreciate the story, mind. Even if you pay zero attention to all the little lore nuggets sprinkled throughout, Bleach is still a thoroughly exciting, if slightly repetitive and predictable, series of magic Chanbara duels that kick ass at basically any level of engagement. If you do connect those dots though, you come to realize that reishi particles aren't just a more sciencey take on your typical I can't believe it's not key universe permeating life force. They're the fundamental building block of the Bleach universe itself. Physical and spirit world alike, everything in this series is made of the stuff, which is not a detail that the manga ever explicitly gives away, but it's the only explanation for how the spirit pressure levels between Earth and the spirit realm could be exactly equal, with the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey membrane of spirit stuff between them threatening to pop if the differential ever gets too big, with the fact that there's clearly way more spirit particles in the atmosphere of Soul Society. The reason for that is all the spirit particles in the real world are inside physical objects. Neato. But why does any of this matter? I guess it kind of doesn't. I mean, I think it's super neat, and I wanted to include it in this video because it's so neat. The way that Kubo manages to cram so much complexity into a story with effectively as much exposition of Dragon Ball is just crazy. But because Bleach is so good at hiding its power level, its power system hasn't really been as influential as some of the other manga we've already talked about that just kind of hand it all to you. Easier to copy notes when the author actually wrote those notes down, you know? Looking at the newer generation of Shonen battle series and their power systems, you can see the influence of the big other two everywhere. My Hero Academia creator Kohei Horikoshi's first ever Jump published work was One Piece fan art, so it's probably not surprising that Hiroaka's quirk system has a lot in common with Devil Fruit's. Quirks all fall into three broad categories: permanent body mutations, temporary transformations, and emitter abilities that cover pretty much everything else. In fact, the conceptual range of what quirks can be might be even greater than Devil Fruit's, simply because they're allowed to be completely useless. Though, on the flip side, the fact that they need to be plausible biological functions does limit them to a degree. That biological aspect is easily the most interesting thing about the system, and where it really starts to differentiate itself from its inspiration. Where Devil Fruit powers are relatively rare, quirks are so common that it's weird for someone not to have one. And instead of all quirk users having one universal kryptonite-esque weakness, each power has interesting, unique drawbacks related to how it works and how that clashes with normal human biology, which the users need to learn to work around in order to be more effective with their powers. Kinda like mutants and X-Men, which were also obviously a big source of inspiration for this superhero story. And of course, the fact that quirks are genetically heritable has all sorts of horrifying eugenicsy implications that the story's able to run with in different directions from both One Piece and X-Men. Meanwhile, Yuki Tabata's Black Clover borrows as much from Naruto as Chakra borrowed from Nen to build its mana system. Though Black Clover does lean a little harder into each character having their own innate signature abilities, with a subsystem that ties them learning new spells directly to their character development. It also has its own equivalent to Jinchuriki, humans in Naruto whose jutsu is enhanced by the tailed beasts sealed within their bodies in devils and devil hosts. But again, Tabata takes that lore in a very different direction from Naruto, the same way that Kishimoto used Togashi's ideas as a springboard for doing his own thing. Still, it is very much the same kind of thing that Naruto is doing, and if you like one series, you'll probably like the other, which isn't something I can necessarily say when it comes to Bleach and Shonen Jump's other big manga about an elite corps of monster fighting samurai with cool swords. Like Bleach and Yu Hakusho, Demon Slayer features two distinct power systems that its heroes and monsters use, but the big difference is Demon Slayer's systems are grossly imbalanced in favor of the baddies. Demons may as well have stands, what with all the crazy reality warping, physics-defying nonsense they get up to, while the only tool that humans have to do the thing in the title is breathing so good they can slice a boulder in half. Which is impressive, don't get me wrong, but on the grand shonen power scale, all it really does is slightly reduce the incline of the playing field by making it physically possible to kill a demon, not easy or even feasible a lot of the time. Restricting the heroes to this grounded martial arts style power system while the villains get to go hog wild with magic anime bullshit imbues Demon Slayer's fights with a distinct tension you don't see in many other shonen. Kinda just Attack on Titan in those early chapters where the humans' only edge is their maneuverable gear, and the first two parts of JoJo, which were also about destroying the heads of mind-bendingly OP immortal bloodsuckers using nothing but proper breathing techniques. Of course, both those series eventually moved on to totally new power systems for a reason. As tense as that one-sided dynamic can be, restricting your hero's power set like that likewise restricts the variety of battles that they can fight in, which does work for Demon Slayer with its smaller scale conflict and relatively short and sweet 4-year run, but threatens to get tedious fast in any longer story with a larger scope. Now, compared to stands, Titan shifting is obviously a much more natural evolution of that relatively regular dudes versus OP monsters dynamic. I mean, if the monsters in your setting have supernatural abilities already and humans don't, then it follows that we'd probably invent or discover a way to use those abilities for ourselves. That's just human ingenuity. And that concept's actually been gaining traction in shonen manga lately as an alternative to key-like power systems in series like Kaiju No. 8. In fact, you can trace it back through Evangelion, way past Dragon Ball and Fist of the North Star, all the way to Go Nagai's Devilman in 1972. However, if you hadn't noticed, this video's already way too fucking long. And if I got into that, I'd also have to get into the body horror-based power systems of seinen battle series like Parasite and Tokyo Ghoul. Besides, you can't really talk about Titan shifting without explaining Gundams and new types, and if I did get into Kaiju No. 8, then I'd also have to talk about other Jump series that haven't been animated like Undead Unluck or Yozakura Family, and then I'd have to go on a whole big rant about how Somanin makes no goddamn sense. Plus, I already glossed over Saint Seiya, didn't even mention World Trigger or Hitman Reborn, and I barely touched on the lineage from JoJo to Yu-Gi-Oh! To Shaman King, which directly leads into Bleach's Zanpakuto, and Magi's Jin Equip system, not to mention Soul Eater's demon weapons. And if Shonen Gangan manga's on the table, then I gotta talk about FMA, and that needs at least a half an hour to itself. And if I do that, then I definitely can't hold myself back from getting into how the avatar cycles reflected in the physicality of the real-world martial arts they used as a basis for each bending style. And look, this topic is simply a bottomless pit, and we gotta stop somewhere lest we dive so deep there's no coming back. Wait, shit, do relics count as... No, stop it, Jeff. Focus. Okay, I'm gonna talk about exactly 2 more Shonen Jump series, and then we're done. What's more, I'm gonna talk about them at the same time, because Chainsaw Man's Devils and Jujutsu Kaisen's titular curses are, at least on a surface level, almost identical concepts. Both are monsters born from negative human emotions focused on certain places, objects, or ideas with power directly proportionate to our collective fear of whatever they represent. And both can only be defeated by humans who are able to turn that evil power against them. But the similarities kinda end there. In Chainsaw Man, humans have no way to tap into the power system on their own, though that also means there's no limits on who gets to have powers. Anyone can become a devil hunter if they're desperate or crazy enough, but to do so, you need to make a contract with the devil, which almost always comes at a very steep cost, including but not limited to your skin and or organs. Though there are exceptions if a devil has something to gain from working with a person, gets along with them, or just plain thinks they're hot. Basically, there's no rhyme or reason as to who has what powers in the Chainsaw Man universe, and the limits on using them are entirely arbitrary. Meanwhile, Jujutsu, the ability to sense and manipulate Juryoku, or cursed energy, is anything but. It's a rare power, granted at birth to a select few individuals with the right genetics and brain chemistry. Most of those questionably lucky few are also born with an innate cursed technique that allows them to manifest that energy or bend reality with it in some unique way. Even without a technique, you can still use cursed energy to enhance your physical abilities or create simple psychic constructs like barriers or shikigami, but you ain't gonna be doing a Rasengan or Kamehameha unless you were born that way. Much to the chagrin of series protagonist and avid Shonen Jump reader Yuji Itadori.
8割って感じなんだよね。大丈夫?
Jujutsu Kaisen takes clear inspiration from basically every shonen series we've talked about so far, using tropes and references from those series to set expectations that it then uses to play crazy mind games with the audience and ultimately hurt us very badly.
祈りとは心の所作
Ow! My feelings. And its titular power system is likewise a massive melting pot of ideas that borrows bits and pieces from most of those influences to create something new and distinctive. Though that said, like his inspiration Kishimoto-sensei, Akutami-sensei was clearly the most inspired by Togashi-sensei. Much like Nen, the range of what curse techniques can do is vast and varied, and the abilities generally symbolize something about the characters using them, but also like Nen, there's a core base of martial artsy fundamentals underpinning all of that that everyone makes use of, which tie into a comprehensive and consistent set of fiddly little metaphysical rules that govern how all abilities work and interact, and that forms the tactical backbone of basically every fight in the series. JJK is so committed to helping the audience understand all of this that it bakes an excuse for sorcerers to explain their powers into the power system itself by expanding on a concept from Hunter x Hunter. Nen contracts allow characters to enhance their abilities by adding some sort of restriction or element of risk to the use of that ability. Binding vows are basically the same idea, only Jujutsu sorcerers can make them with each other as well as with themselves. And in accordance with that, by accepting the risk of telling your enemy how your cursed technique works, the technique becomes more effective on them. However, you don't have to explain everything about the technique to get that advantage, and by omitting key information, you can even mislead your opponent to give yourself a different sort of advantage. By using plot devices like that to help its audience understand and tactically engage with its action, JJK is able to make its fights feel a lot more intense, and all of their outcomes feel earned. In contrast, Chainsaw Man has zero interest in explaining how any of its supernatural nonsense works, and not in the Bleach sort of way where it leaves a breadcrumb trail of clues that attentive readers or viewers can follow to an epiphany about how that stuff works. All of Chainsaw Man's coolest moments leave you thinking, wait, what the fuck? But then, if you take the time to rewatch or reread the series and really contemplate what it all means, you'll eventually come away thinking, no, seriously, what the fuck? Logical understanding is the antithesis of fear. Our brains only keep us up at night pondering shit when we don't understand that shit. And understanding that shit, Tatsuki Fujimoto flatly refuses to formally categorize or systematize devil powers at all. Devils regenerate when you feed them human blood, and the scarier they sound, the scarier they are, but those are the only consistent rules, which makes Chainsaw Man kind of bad at delivering those hype 4D chess moments that the best shonen battle series are known for basically all the same reasons Jujutsu Kaisen's so good at it, but by sacrificing that, it can play to different emotions very effectively. Jujutsu Kaisen is a horror-themed shonen battle tragedy. Chainsaw Man is a shonen battle-themed horror comedy. And the difference between their power systems and how we comprehend them is the difference between those genres. In Jujutsu Kaisen, if an evil spirit traps you in an infinitely looping hallway, all you gotta do to get out is run in opposite directions until the curse technique maintaining the barrier around that space collapses. In Chainsaw Man, your only recourse is to create a perpetual motion machine of blood and agony so unbearable that it drives the concept of eternity itself to give up, which is pretty fucking metal, whereas Jujutsu Kaisen's approach is more, I don't know, prog rock? To be clear though, I'm not saying either system is better than the other. Both work for what the story they're in is trying to accomplish. And that, ultimately, is the most important measure of quality for any power system. Not how deep or technical or original or logically consistent it is, not how it ties into the lore, not even how fun it makes the fights. If the ideas and emotions that your rules of engagement emphasize match the themes and tone of the moments between the fights, it's probably a good system. And if they don't, hopefully your art's good enough to get away with it. I'm Geoff Thew, professional anime fight analyzer, and I really gotta get back to cursing Gege Akutami right about now. If you're reading the manga, you know why.